Previously on the Playaway Podcast. This is also a great weekend just to kind of round the show out. Is if you are into video games, 3 brand new systems for prime selling point right here in the holidays. You got the PS4 Pro, Xbox One X, and you have the Nintendo Switch. Nate, I know you don't play very much video games, but I know Derek, you got kids. Is that Nintendo Switch is something you looking like investing in the near future?
As to mention earlier and remind you that I got some Kingsford for them.
I mean, for yourself. I mean, of course you're a miser for yourself.
No, I'm content. I gotta be honest, nothing about the Switch appeals to me. I've always been a Sony guy. I've never even owned an Xbox, so okay. I'd like to stay true to my brand.
Yeah, so it's obvious that was a really important subject, and we didn't really get a chance to delve into it. But never fear. Your co-captains of the Play Your Way network have developed this new technology that you're about to listen to. So sit back, enjoy. It's time to take a deep dive.
The Player Way.
Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, with all due respect, I know it's weird to hear me come at you with a different theme song. It's kind of like the same theme song, but a slightly different part than you're used to hearing. And it's the second podcast we posted this week. And if you clicked on to the podcast on iTunes or anywhere you can get our podcast in an audio format, you notice it has a slightly different title. Well, we're trying something different. It's still the Play Away Podcast, same product that you're used to. Shout out to my co-captains Nate and Derek. But we're going to do something a little different called Deep Dive the Player Way, where we jump into and delve into a subject that's a little bit more intricate that we talked about on our previous episode. And I'm going to try to have a guest on every single time. And this week, I want to introduce an amazing, he's actually my original co-captain. This guy, we used to actually co-host a show together called The Box Office Hustle. We did 2 seasons together. And then he ended up later on going on with a different crew for a podcast that is incredibly popular, incredibly informative, called Weekly Games Chat. And the deep dive this week is going to be about gaming. And so with no further ado, I'd like to introduce to the Player Way Podcast my brother, Jonathan Barron.
BK. Good to be
here. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well.
It's so weird to have you on a podcast when you had me on your podcast first.
It's so weird to be on somebody else's podcast. This is my first.
If it wasn't, ladies and gentlemen out there, if it wasn't for Jonathan, there would not be a Play Away Podcast. I was in a bit of a creative funk right when this time last year, actually, yeah. And the Pokemon Sun and Moon games came out, and they decided they wanted me to have him, Chris, and Sean, his co-hosts for Weekly Games Chat, had me on to their podcast to talk about that game, and they had me back on a couple more times before I was like, you know what? I think it's time to do this podcasting thing the Player Way, and so that's kind of how we got into it. So, Jonathan, welcome, man. I'm really happy to have you on here, brother.
Thank you very much. I want to give you a warning, BK. When my wife walks in the door, you're going to hear some dogs barking, so we'll get through it.
It's all good, man. And when my wife comes in, you might have to see somebody giving me hugs and kisses, because when she comes home, she wants to immediately jump on me. So, yeah. Shout out to Rachel. So anyway, but we won't take too long. We actually have not rehearsed, just like the Play Away podcast. We're keeping it all the way funky fresh, and we're doing it live. So, thing sucks. So, Jonathan, what I wanted to have you on here about is, I was talking to my co-captains on the last episode. Cyber Monday was one of the subjects we talked about, and the other 2 guys, our audience are more casual gamers. They're not the guys that are watching the marquee for the upcoming products. They're not going on blogs. They're just kind of whatever's the most popular thing, the most poppin' thing, the thing that kind of comes to the surface, or if they have to buy buy gaming systems and games for their kids, our podcast is how they're going to kind of hear about it. So if they hear it on our podcast, then they know they're making their purchases the player way. So we kind of got into talking about the fact that this year is one of the first times in a long time where Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft all have a fresh console out. Right. Now, Sony's is not as fresh, but PS4 Pro is considered that class.
Yep.
Would you agree that it's still somewhat new?
Yeah, if you're wanting the top tier system in the PlayStation library, you're definitely going with a PS4 Pro.
And they're definitely packaging things to sell that. But what I found interesting after our last podcast is, according to IGN, the number one selling system on Cyber Monday and Black Friday was the Nintendo Switch.
Oh, you saw that too.
Yeah, I saw that too. What do you think about that, man?
Hashtag John was right.
Yep.
Yeah, me and my co-hosts have been, talking about this for a couple of months now. Now, Chris, my co-host Chris, shout out to Chris, shout out to Sean as well.
Shout out to you guys, man.
Yeah, of course.
Miss you guys.
Chris has made some excellent points and well-reasoned points that, and I thought it was up in the air as well. Sony and Microsoft laid it on Black Friday. They dropped not their premium consoles, but their Xbox One S and their regular PlayStation. They dropped them to like $189, $200. So it was very reasonable to think that you just were not gonna. A parent would look at those consoles and go, "Well, here's the Switch. It's $300, but I'm just gonna get this one, which is $100 cheaper." But turns out, it didn't take into account the high demand of the Switch, and that demand is really, really high. And luckily, the stock was up, so they had plenty to sell.
Yeah, Nintendo, speaking of stock being up, Nintendo was not playing around this year. They had, around the same time, they had the Super Nintendo Classic console come out. They had the new Wii U version of the Super Mario Brothers, what is it called? Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Maker. That's it.
That's
Super
right.
Mario Maker Wii U. So they had that. They had the new Pokemon Sun and Moon Ultra
Right.
Moons, Ultra Sun, and then they also had the Super Mario Odyssey.
Right.
So it was a pretty stacked thing. Something I also noticed that could have taken a little bit away from the Xbox One X is I actually had some parents from my workplace that texted me because they know we have our podcast. They know I stay up on all the video gaming systems, and they would go to Costco and they saw a price drop with the Xbox One S. And so they thought their kids were saying Xbox One S instead of One X, and they saw the power drop. And so they were texting me, say, "Hey, is this the system?" And at first my initial thought was yes, but then I looked at it. I was like, how is the Xbox One X so cheap? And then I looked at it and I'm like, oh no, that's the One S, not the One X. And they're like, well, what's the difference? Yep. So I think there's going to be a lot of kids with that naming. A lot of people with the whole Project Scorpio thing, people thought that the naming would be a little sexier.
Yeah.
And I get tell me what you think about the naming schema. And am I right in thinking that people are going to be, parents in particular, may be a little confused about what system is what?
Oh, of course. Yeah, that's definitely the case. When you're looking at the Xbox One X versus the Xbox One S, you've got a parent going, "Oh, this one's white," or "This one's gray."
Exactly.
Well, I don't know which color he wants. Why is this so expensive? So yeah, it's definitely confusing. You almost wonder why they didn't just call it Scorpio, or something like that to eliminate confusion.
Or just call it. It's weird that they called it Project Scorpio when they had when they had Xbox One S coming. You would think that they would have named it something else, called it Project X to begin with or something.
Oh yeah. And then call it
because
Scorpio.
Exactly, because it's just really confusing from a lay person to know what is what. And if I was a parent, I'm obviously going to shop down in price, and I'm going to say, well, I'm going to go up to the person at the counter and say, will this play this particular game? So they're going to grab that game and say, will it play this game? And they're going to say yes, because all of the Xbox games, if I'm correct, are backward compatible to the Xbox One, Xbox One S, and Xbox One X.
Yep.
Correct?
Correct.
The difference is just resolution and GPU and teraflops and all that stuff. So, all right. So that's going on right now. I'm really happy because I don't know what it is. I used to be a hardcore Sony and Xbox person, especially around the time Fable 3 came out. I was a huge Xbox person. Xbox was also the first console to really go hardcore with a really complete OS that was user-friendly to get the whole idea of an all-in-one type of Netflix and Hulu and everything else. Even though PS3 did it as well, it didn't do it. PS4 and PS3 did it. It didn't do it as well as the Xbox 360, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. The Xbox One is my first Xbox system, and I've really embraced the system because it's still, it's not selling as much, but it's still the best operating system out there.
Man,
and online connectivity.
Very complete.
I mean, this Microsoft.
It's very complete. It's very user friendly. I was very tempted to switch over into using that, but then they're actually doing, even down to the fact that you can actually plug another console into the Xbox One and make that your hub for other consoles. I thought that was kind of cool too.
Yeah.
So now that we got the Nintendo Switch going on, the new Mario Odyssey is out. This is a game that people are loving. They're having fun with it, but the Nintendo games still aren't garnering the rumor mill and all of the controversy. The bigger controversy going on, and you guys talked about it on the latest episode of Weekly Games Chat, is Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Yes.
Can you share some light on that, on what that's all about to our listeners?
Well, I will say as a caveat to this, Chris and Sean would probably have more authority over the subject as far as having played the game because they're the online gamers. But the controversy came to be when basically EA put in place a system involving loot crates. And loot crates are not something new to the industry. They've been around for a long time. Overwatch has loot crates. The recent Assassin's Creed has loot crates. But it's all about how you introduce loot crates and how it involves the system and the economy of the game. So, for example, it came to light that you could either buy a loot crate or purchase the ability to use Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader, or if you wanted to just grind for it, it would take you approximately 40 hours of grinding to be able to get access to Luke or Vader, or you can just go ahead and buy it and whip everybody's tail online. And Reddit got into an uproar, and the pitchforks came out and everything like that. And EA backed off and drove down the play time to about 15 hours. Chris speculated, and I think this is good speculation, that the president of Disney might have called the president of EA and said this is a problem. So they just completely pulled their loot crates from the game without any news on when they're going to add them again. If they're going to add them again, we don't know.
And if you're listening to this or you're watching this and you've never listened or seen Weekly Games Chat, it is an exquisite video game podcast. It's probably the best video game podcast I've ever heard and listened to. And during college football season, it's also at the first maybe 10 minutes of the podcast, it's weekly college game day podcast. So it's so you get a little bit of everything with them. So shout out to those guys. But yeah, I think Chris and Sean were definitely onto something when they were speculating that I think it's Bob Iger probably got involved. Mm-hmm. I'm almost for certain that Disney was like, "Hey guys, we don't need any controversy right before episode 8 comes out. Like, I need you guys to figure out this thing out and put it to bed." But as you're describing these things to me, and you're doing a great job with it, it's weird that it sounds like Clash of Clans or any of the other like iPhone type of games, like mobile games, like with loot crates and accelerating the pace and being able to buy your way to the finish line a little bit. And it's interesting that is kind of the way that console games are going. Is that something that's happening with other console games, or is this just is everybody doing it, or is this the first one that's really done it?
Well, It's not the first time it's been done. Surely, one of the differences is, and it's definitely worth pointing out. Like with games like Clash of Clans or the recent Animal Crossing that came out on iOS, they all
Hearthstone as well.
Yeah, exactly. They're all free to start. That's the term. It used to be free to play, but that turned out to technically not be true. So it's now free to start. But the way gamers feel that are console gamers and PC gamers is you're already shoveling out $60. Then you find you have to purchase a season pass if you want the season pass, then loot crates. I don't know, for Assassin's Creed, you have these things called Helix points, and you can't earn them in the game. You have to purchase them in the store. And
oh wow,
yeah, I looked that up last night. I'm like, why haven't I gotten any Helix points for playing this game? But yeah, there's a difference between the mobile area, because they're willing to put money into these games because they're free to begin with, and with Star Wars Battlefront 2, you're looking at $60, and then God knows how much you have to put forth in order to play to win is basically how they're phrasing it.
Right. I had Breath of the Wild when it came out earlier this year. I was incredibly enamored with that game. It was the most.
It was
at
okay.
first. At first, it was to me was the most immersive Legend of Zelda at first, because all of the stuff that was there, the raw material that was put into that game, it felt a lot like the original Legend of Zelda, but more fleshed out graphically. And so, but my hope was, it's like, okay, so now we have the original Legend of Zelda feel, and now what we're going to do is get the new age story elements that we've gotten in other iterations like Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker, or either Twilight Princess. Yeah. But when you actually beat the game, it kind of feels like that's it. And then they came out later and said, oh, well, there's going to be an expansion pack that has more dungeons and such. And I felt very turned off by that. And as much as I was enamored with that game, I did not purchase the expansion pack because I'm the average Joe when it comes to playing video games. I work, 50, 60, 70 hours a week sometimes with my job. My wife also works a lot. So when we're off, we want to spend a little bit more time together. But every now and again, I want to unwind and play a true video game and not just something on my iOS, poop, games as Chris calls it. So I want to get a little deeper into something. And it's very frustrating to know that the game isn't complete. Whereas when I played Super Mario Odyssey later in the fall, that was a much more, in a weird way, a Mario game had more story and more of a finish to it than a Legend of Zelda game. And that was weird to me because the last time that ever happened was the original NES, where Mario was way more popular than Legend of Zelda was. What do you feel about that? Is that just me, or is that other people feeling that way?
I'm sure people feel that way. The way I see it is, and just to point out, in full disclosure, I haven't finished Breath of the Wild, but I've played about 70 to 80 hours of it.
Well, and it's impossible to finish almost.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, I would be upset if you had to pay more money for an expansion if the game was 20 hours long, and everybody's bar is different. How much is a game worth? Everybody's bar is different. But to me, if it gives me that much playtime, I'm not going to be upset that the option is out there to purchase more content because it's already given me so much. That's how I feel about it.
I can hear you on that. Let me be a devil's advocate. I feel like in today's day and age, it's impossible to get a Metal Gear Solid or a Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. These are games that back in the day, a game had to be finished and the disc was
yeah.
closed, and there was no such thing as an expansion pack for a console game. At least you did have expansion packs for online games, but then you still didn't have the MMO RPGs yet. So
if that game was broke, that was just tough.
Yeah, and so what was great about Metal Gear Solid, for example, is it's a game story-wise that stood the test of time. And then Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty expanded upon the mythos. I feel like now we get other games like that game, but it's not a complete story. If you have ever played, if you're listening to this and you never played Metal Gear Solid, you may want to figure out a way to get like the old school versions of it. There are updated versions of it, but it is an amazing story, and it is a complete game. There's Easter eggs and there's ways to replay the game to get more stuff, because you, depending on how you finish it, you have items that are secret. I don't feel like there's a lot of games like that anymore. I feel like, you know.
Yeah, that's a fair point, but at the same time, and I've used this point a number of times on my podcast, but games are getting much more expensive to make, and they're staying the same price. They've been the same price since 2001, 2003, 2002. I remember my parents, when I was a kid, bought me DuckTales on the NES, and it was an $80 game, and it was finished. So inflation, has not decreased; it's increased. So, yeah, at the same time, they'll give us, an 80-hour game, but are we the ones that are giving them the profit that they need in order to make the next game that we demand as a consumer? Or are the people who buy the loot crates, or the people who buy the DLC and the season passes, are they the ones that are allowing sequels and other projects to go forward? Because we as a consumer demand that these things be louder, bigger, prettier, but they better stay the same price, or we're going to send our pitchforks after you.
And that goes kind of, and as you go toward that conversation, it goes more toward a bigger, more important conversation. And now we get to the deeper dive part of our broadcast, because now all of that was just the setup to what the questions we really want to talk about, because it goes beyond video games. And it's that on your podcast this past week, you guys kind of got into a bit of a debate about, what is it, intellectual property, the story, when a person puts all of their years, video games now are like movie franchises. Babies are born. I think you guys said this on your podcast. Babies are born during these productions. Whole economies of people are employed by these games. And what is it like for a director, a developer who really had this idea of a story, and they have to sacrifice it because the studio is pushing you to make more money? And this isn't just this is transferable beyond just video games. It goes into what's happening with Marvel and DC right now. DC just, Warner Brothers in the DC they just came out with Justice League. And I mean, it was a critical and an economic failure. Even though it was a very entertaining film by most people, and everyone says it's a great start on building a franchise. And just when we're like arguing back and forth between people who hated the film and people who love everything that Zack Snyder touches, then the trailer for Avengers comes out, Infinity War. And right after really, they gave them a couple of holiday weekends, and then now we're getting into, Disney's month, because, Star Wars is coming out. So they're like, all right, cool. Let's show them what a real film is like. And in my opinion, I don't want to get too much in the trailer, because we're going to talk about the trailer more on the podcast coming up this week. But it really showed you someone in the Warner Brothers Studios area who is coming up with these stories. They're suffering. Just like probably in the Star Wars Battlefront, they had this idea for loot crates, and you take the loot crates out of the game, now you got this Swiss cheese hole of a game. How do you feel about it? Share with us a little bit about that debate you guys had, and what your philosophy is on it. How do you feel about it?
Well, it went a little something like this, and I recognize the problem. I guess I just don't know the solution. The debate we had was basically what it came down to was the difference between a big studio like EA or Activision kind of mucking up their production of these video games because their responsibility is to investors. I mean, EA is a publicly traded company versus, I don't know, the studio, I forget the Ninja Theory, who recently came out with Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. There's a difference between these two studios because one is smaller, one is singular, and they can focus more on their vision and try to go about creating a product that they view as art. And, the debate between whether a video game is art or not is maybe a subject for another time. But the problem that my co-hosts seem to have, and I completely understand the point, is EA can get in its own way, and companies like it. Take the recent Mass Effect game that came out earlier this year. BioWare is, by all accounts, an amazing developer.
Right.
And basically what happened is EA said, we need to get this game out. And BioWare, you can imagine, probably this is how it went down. No, we have this vision and we can't meet this vision. If you demand that it comes out in 2 months, we need at least another year. And the president, the board, they say, no, this has to come out because we owe this to our shareholders. We owe this to our board. So it comes out. And we all know how that went with glitches, with just a murky story, just an overall just not a good game compared to the masterful Mass Effect trilogy from the previous generation.
100% right with you.
So it's the difference between preserving a vision versus meeting a bottom line, and which one's more important. I think a vision is important, but I don't think it's as important at the expense of ignoring your responsibilities as an industry, because if you want the industry to grow and get better and bring in more people, you need to sort of weigh them equally. They need to be equal partners as far as, instead of having the artist proclaim, I am the artist, I need my vision preserved, get out of here. It's just a game.
It's just a game.
Yeah.
So when is it not just a game then?
They happen once in a while, and when you see them. I mean, Chris will tell you that Journey, the game Journey, is a beautiful piece of art, a vision that wasn't compromised. I think they lost money. I can't be too certain, but the Senua's Sacrifice, that Hellblade game, its goal was to make profit in 6 months. They made profit in 3 months by selling 500,000 copies. If EA turned around and said, we sold 500,000 copies of Star Wars Battlefront 2, they'd fire the president. So it's just a different goal and a different whatever market you're trying to reach. It's just a different goal for different types of developers, because there's all different types of. There's developers that work in their garages, and 100,000 copies is $1 million for them. So you just never know. Some people have the luxury of focusing on their vision, and some people just cannot do that. But it doesn't mean they can't make a good product.
And here's what I was being a bit of a devil's advocate, but now I'm going to pepper in and sweeten the deal by giving you what I think.
Yeah.
And here's what I think, and I haven't really heard this perspective, so I want to hear what your take is on it.
This is a BK original?
Exactly. It is. I think what people haven't realized is they compare video game production to movie franchise production. And what people don't understand is what makes movie art, what makes film art, is the ability to create these realms, these stories that aren't real, or recreating a story or an event that did happen and making it play out up on the screen. And essentially what it is you're taking sound stages, studios, and locations and turning them into tangible things that people can see and taste and touch and feel, and then immerse themselves in it, forget what they were doing before they walked into the theater, and get enticed by the mise-en-scène, and then are transported. And in video games, it's not just this thing that helps you burn through time and kill time and be entertained anymore. It is for entertainment purposes, but it is a form of art, but not in the same way. The art of creating a film is taking the lensing, having the right lensing and the right cameras and the capturing of the light and managing the light within the daytime and bending light using different types of refraction devices so that you get the right kind of look in the color. And then you got the editing, you got the special effects, and it all has to be done within a timetable. And I think where video games is still behind is that they weren't around back when Hollywood first started up, and when you had the Barrymores that were running everything in the smaller Howard Hughes studios and things like that. So film has matured into an art form, and that can be monetized, and they created something called a producer, and all the producer's job is to manage the business of the film, not the creative stuff. I think within video games, it's still such a young art form that people haven't figured out that what the art of creating a video game is getting the right coders that can create, and the artists and the story and the screenwriters who can produce the game and produce the tangibles, those deliverables in the timetable they've been given. Classically, what we've been seeing is that a studio announces that a big game is coming out, and they have this ambitious timeline that everyone knows jokingly it will never make it. I've heard it on your podcast where they say, Mass Effect 3 is coming out, blah, blah, blah. And y'all like, yeah, right. Blah, y'all know it's impossible to happen because the technology's just not there yet. And so I think that's the art of it, is learning to work and hire the right people who can get the job done, who can rob the bank in enough time before the cops come. And when they don't do it, they've created this new thing like, okay, well, we have expansion packs. And that helps us that if we screw up and we hired the wrong people, we can give them more time to develop the game. Whereas back in the day, you had to close that disc out. So there was no expansion pack. So my feeling on expansion packs is it's the same thing as the special features. If a movie comes out and the film sucks, then they'll say Batman versus Superman, there's going to be deleted scenes, so that'll fix the film for us. And then you see the extended edition, you go, hey, it was actually pretty good when you see the extended version. But that original version was garbage. It's the same thing. Breath of the Wild, in my opinion, was not nearly as great as I hoped it would have been. It was a great technical achievement, but there wasn't enough story to keep me coming back and doing all 7,000 of those dungeons. It's like, why do I need all of these? I don't need them to beat the game. Why are they here? What is it for? I need story to make me feel like it. I need to not be able to get all of the cutscenes so that, I shouldn't be able to beat Ganon 100% and beat the game and not have all of the stuff in the game.
That's how you really feel?
That's how I feel. If you're going to put it in the game, yeah. I mean, if you're going to put it in the game, why? There's this, I feel like
because I think it alludes to my a previous point I made, because it's just getting so hard to do. I honestly think some developers out there go, I just couldn't get this. I might be just lying to myself a little bit, but sometimes a developer goes, I just couldn't get to this piece. Like the Frozen Wilds, the DLC for Horizon Zero Dawn, one of the best games of the year this year by far.
Yep.
I was listening to a podcast about this, and that DLC, or that expansion as they're calling it, I think we've moved away from DLC and they're calling them expansions now, but this area, most of the time you think of an expansion as something that takes place after the events of the game. This thing takes place in the middle of the game. It doesn't take into account that you've beaten the game. So it's like the developers at, I'm I'm not on my game tonight. I can't remember the developer.
You're okay.
Name.
You're okay.
But it's just a matter of this is a portion of the game that we just couldn't get to, and it's just like, wow, I almost don't really want to play it at this point because I've already beaten the game. Why do I want to go back? But I talk to myself a lot, and I'm going to get it at some point. But just to that question of art, though, I mean, when it comes to movies, is Transformers art?
I think filmmaking is art.
Well, see, that's the thing with me.
Well, no, I'm getting to you. I'm getting to you.
Okay.
For example, is McDonald's culinary art? No. You can use the culinary arts to create crap. There's a lot of people out here who are Taekwondo martial artists that suck. Okay? Rex Kwando. All right? But they still use an art. The art is just not applied properly. So I think that's what you're talking about. Is we're talking about, and that's kind of what we're getting to is mastery of the art. There's a lot of people out here who know how to be a filmmaker, and there's a lot of people who know how to develop video games, but where it becomes art is where you raise the bar within the state of the art and show a standard that people and your peers can be impressed with.
Well, to me, the question about art is, someone once said to me, or I read somewhere from somebody smarter than me, what's the definition of art? Well, the definition of art is, if you have to ask if it's art, that means it's art. I mean, the question itself poses the idea that it's art. But, you know, I look at it and go, there's levels of art. Is any game art? Yeah, I think you can make the case. Or is any movie art? Yeah, I think you can make the case. But art still has to make money. And art still has to feed a family. And art, you know...
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, ever since Leonardo got involved with the Medici family, that was the beginning of art being bankrolled. And so in order for art to live on in perpetuity, there has to be some Medici family that backs it. So I think that's what we got artwork that is out here that people are using, but in order to employ 100 people, even just 100 people, which is really not a lot of people, to employ that many people within a piece of art, you have to sacrifice something. You got to package it some way so that you got the guy who, like at Office Space, who he's like, you don't understand. I'm the people person. Well, can't the people just take the stuff down there themselves? You don't understand. I'm a people person. I have people skills. I'm a person, damn it. I have value. So when you employ that many people, the art gets lessened. That's the reason why I think when you get into asking what is art, the types of people who really parse the idea of what is art, they're creating their art in smaller groups where money is not a factor. When it comes to our podcasters, that's the reason why podcasting is growing, is because you can bankroll your own success and then you can talk about whatever you want on your own terms. So that's a long way to say that, yeah, I agree with you. I love this conversation, man. I appreciate this conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me for a second pleasure. About it. All of this conversation, if you're listening to us, thank you for listening. We wanted to kind of jump deeper into it and give you a little more opportunity to hear where the state of the art is within gaming, because at the end of the day, like Jonathan says, you got to be able to sell it, and it's Christmas time and we're all buying. So, again, let's talk about what would you say is the best console? What's the best bang for the buck this year?
That's tough this year. You're looking at a situation where, you know, the Switch is in high demand. If I were I would recommend the Switch to anyone. It's got two of the best reviewed titles of the year, and two of the best reviewed titles of all time. So the content is there. I mean, oftentimes with a Nintendo console, you're asking where's the content, but the content's there. But the reality is, BK, you can't really go wrong this year with either console, and it's really a matter of what your gaming style is. If you want online gaming, the community, the biggest online community, and we never thought this would happen this generation, but the biggest online community is the PlayStation community. Yep. The best quality online community and the best operating system, the most user-friendly system to operate is probably the Xbox One family of systems. I'm trying not to be a Nintendo fanboy when you ask me this question, but I think sometimes you just got to go with what the hot item is, and the hot item is the Switch. But you really can't go wrong with any system.
I think if you are buying for your kids and it's your first time buying a system for them, I think the best product to buy them would be a Nintendo Switch, because it is mobile, it is new, and it is different, and I think it has the most room to grow. However, neither of the other two are bad, because Dragon Ball Fighter Z is coming out, and that's going to be a game changer for fighting games. Fighting games is always a great it has a good attachment rate to it, and Dragon Ball Z right now, or Dragon Ball Super, with that anime being out now, I mean, when those new episodes come out, they break the internet every time. Never have we had a Dragon Ball series that was out currently where you could really watch it as it's on TV in Japan. What a wonderful time to be alive. So that's a franchise that's going to grow in a way that I don't think anybody... I feel like it's possible that the new Mortal Kombat is the Dragon Ball universe. There's a lot of promise there. So, yeah. So anyway, well, Jonathan, let's plug your product, man. You came on my show. You gave us an opportunity to hear your thoughts. We appreciate having you on here. Plug your product, man.
Well, again, my name is Jonathan. I'm a co-host with my friends Chris and Sean on the weekly Games Chat podcast. You can find it on iTunes and other podcast devices. Our podcast drops every Wednesday. You can also email us if you have questions or thoughts or concerns at weeklygameschat@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter at weeklygameschat. And I'm working on a couple of things for your network.
The Play Your Way Network. The Play Your Way Network at playlifeyourway.com. Jonathan is going to be doing a couple of articles for us, and we appreciate that. So be looking out for that. Also, are you guys going to be doing a best of 2017 podcast like toward the end of the year?
Oh, for sure. It'll either be at the end of December or the 1st of January is typically when we do it.
Cool.
Or if we don't have anything to talk about.
Well, no, we're excited to see that, and just so you know, we're going to be doing the best films, because we tend to lean more toward box office draws and stuff like that. So we're going to be doing the top 10 best films of 2017, and it's not just stuff that was in theaters. It could be something that was a Netflix original or something like that. And we're also doing the top 10 worst films of 2017. So all three of those types of things coming out. If you want to know what was the best and worst video games and movie wise, shout out to us. Just come listen to us at the Play Your Way Network and Weekly Games Chat on iTunes and wherever fine podcasts are never sold but always streamed for free. So Jonathan, thank you for being on with us this week, and shout out to my co-captains, Derreck and Nate. We will be back on Monday. But until then, no matter what roads you take or what paths you decide to follow, just make sure you're doing it the player way. We will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening to the Player Way podcast. Recorded in a single take from Los Angeles, California, Dallas, Texas, and Atlanta, Georgia, by Nathan Petersen, Derek Lewis, and BK Jackson. Our opening theme is titled Bound by Ricky Remedy, courtesy of Elysian Records, and our closing theme is titled Coconut King Diaries by Xander, spelled Zahnder. You can find this music by both Ricky Remedy and Xander, and many more tracks on SoundCloud. And remember, no matter what choices you make or paths you follow, just make sure you do it the player way. See you next week.